Someone hands you a photo. You're 8 months old in it. Your mother is laughing. Your father has cake in his hair. The room is full of people who came just for you. You don't remember any of it. Not the cake, not the laughter, not the room. And here's the part that should bother you more than it does. You were there. You were fully conscious, fully present, fully you. But the real answer for why that memory is gone isn't simple forgetting. It's far stranger than that. You assume memory works like a camera. Point it, click, store the file. Pull it up later when you need it. But that's not what's happening in a baby's brain. Something else is happening. Something that has nothing to do with how good or bad the moment was. For decades, scientists called this gap infantile amnesia. Sigmund Freud noticed it first over a century ago. He saw that adults could recall almost nothing from before age 3 or 4, and he assumed it was repression. He thought the mind was hiding something. He was wrong about the why, but he was right that something real was happening. Something universal, something every human shares. Here's what actually happens inside an infant's skull. The hippocampus, the brain region responsible for stitching moments into long-term memories, is still under construction. Not missing. Under construction. New neurons are being born there at a staggering rate, faster than almost anywhere else in your developing brain. And every time a new neuron arrives, it has to wire itself into the existing network. Imagine renovating a library while people are still trying to read books inside it. Shelves get moved. Index cards get reshuffled. Some books fall behind the shelf and are never found again. That's your first few years of memory. Constant renovation. Does that mean babies can't remember anything at all? Not even close. Psychologist Carolyn Rovey Collier ran a now famous series of experiments using something as simple as a mobile above a crib. She tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to the mobile, so every kick made it spin. Babies as young as 2 or 3 months old learn the connection almost immediately. Kick, mobile moves. Kick again, it moves again. Weeks later, when she reattached the ribbon, the babies remembered. They started kicking before she even touched the ribbon. The memory was there, it had survived. So if the memory exists, why can't you reach it now? Because there's a difference between a memory existing and a memory being retrievable years later in the specific form you'd recognize as remembering. Rovey Collier's infants were showing implicit memory, a kind of bodily, automatic recall. Your muscles can remember how to ride a bike decades after you learned, without you consciously replaying the lesson. Babies have that. What they don't yet have, not fully, is a second system, autobiographical memory, the kind that comes packaged with a sense of this happened to me, in this place, at this time. That second system needs language. It needs a stable sense of self. It needs a timeline you can hang events on, like ornaments on a tree that doesn't exist yet for a 1-year-old. Without the tree, the ornaments just scatter. Psychologist Patricia Bauer at Emory University spent years tracking this transition directly. She and her colleagues interviewed young children about specific events in their lives, then came back months and years later to see what survived. The pattern she found was almost mathematical in its consistency. The youngest children forgot the fastest. The forgetting curve was steepest before age 7, and it leveled off right around the age most adults report as their earliest memory. Around 3.5, sometimes 4. That number isn't random. It maps almost exactly onto when a child's hippocampus stabilizes enough to support long-term storage, and when language becomes sophisticated enough to encode an experience as a story rather than just a sensation. But the hippocampus isn't working alone in this. It needs help from another part of the brain that takes even longer to mature, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for organizing experience into a timeline. A memory isn't just a stored sensation. It's a sensation tagged with a sense of when and where, stitched into a sequence that lets you say this happened before that, and that happened after this. Without that tagging system online, even a vivid moment has nowhere to file itself. It floats. And a memory that can't file itself eventually gets overwritten by the next thing, competing for the same shelf space. This is why a 2-year-old can describe something that happened yesterday in perfect detail, then fail completely to recall it 6 months later. The moment was real. The encoding was real, but the filing system wasn't finished being built yet. And an unfiled memory in a still renovating brain rarely survives the next wave of construction. Think about what that means for a moment. Your first memory isn't the first thing that happened to you. It's the first thing your brain had the architecture to keep. Everything before that point didn't vanish into nothing. It got folded into something else. Call it the foundation. The wiring that shapes how warm or unsafe the world feels to you, long before you have words for warm or unsafe. You don't remember being held as an infant, but something in you learned at a level beneath language, whether being held meant safety or chaos. That lesson is still running in the background of every relationship you've had since. So when you panic in a crowded room for no clear reason, or feel instantly calm around a certain kind of voice, you might be standing on top of a memory you can't see. Not gone, just unreachable in words. This shows up in places you'd never expect to look. The food you find comforting without knowing why. The specific tone of voice that makes you relax before you've consciously registered a single word someone said. The kind of physical closeness that feels like home to you and not to someone else raised in a different house, with a different rhythm of being held, fed, and soothed. None of that came from a memory you can replay. It came from thousands of repeated moments before you had any way to store them as stories. Moments that nonetheless taught your nervous system what safety, danger, warmth, and distance feel like in your particular body. Why would evolution design a system this strange? Why build a brain that learns constantly but can't tell you what it learned? Because remembering everything would have been a disaster. A toddler's world is chaos by design, packed with new faces, new sounds, new dangers, and new joys, dozens of times a day. A system built to permanently lock in every one of those moments as a distinct, retrievable memory would have drowned in its own storage. Instead, the infant brain prioritizes something more useful for survival: extracting patterns. Learning that loud noises often mean danger. Learning that a certain face means food and comfort. Learning the rules of a language well enough to use it instinctively without ever remembering a single lesson. You didn't memorize your native language. You absorbed it, the same way you absorbed thousands of other lessons before your conscious memory ever switched on. The amnesia isn't a flaw. It's the price of learning faster than memory could keep up. Here's where it gets even stranger. Some researchers now think infantile amnesia might not be permanent erasure at all, but something closer to encryption. In 2014, Patricia Bauer and her colleague Marina Larkina tracked children's memories for specific events over several years and found that some very early memories, the ones everyone assumes are gone forever, fade unevenly rather than disappearing all at once. A smell, a specific song, a room laid out a certain way. The right cue can sometimes pull a fragment back up that seemed lost. That changes the whole emotional weight of forgetting your own childhood. It's not a loss in the way losing a photograph is a loss. The photograph is gone. The memory might just be waiting for the right trigger. There's another layer to this that most people never consider. The age your earliest memory lands on isn't fixed the same way across every person or even every culture. Researchers who study autobiographical memory across different societies have found that the average age of someone's first memory can shift depending on how that culture talks to its children. In places where parents narrate a child's day back to them constantly, asking what happened, retelling the story, looping the event back through language again and again, children tend to report earlier first memories. In places where that kind of narration happens less, the average age creeps later. Why would talking about a memory change when it forms? Because a memory isn't really finished the moment it happens. It gets finished later when it's rehearsed. Every time someone helps a toddler put a moment into words, the brain practices the exact skill it will eventually need to retrieve that moment alone. Years down the line, you weren't just living your early childhood, you were being trained, one bedtime recap at a time, to eventually be able to hold on to childhood at all. That means your earliest memory isn't purely a biological fact. It's part biology, part the unique chorus of voices that surrounded you, repeating your own life back to you until some of it finally stuck. Two children with identical brains, raised in households with different habits of conversation, could end up with noticeably different starting points for their conscious life story. Think about how strange that is. Somewhere in your past is the literal moment your memory turned on, and you have no idea you crossed it. There was no flash, no fade in, no clear line between not remembering and remembering. The switch flips so gradually that the person flipping it never feels it happen. You only notice years later when you try to reach further back and find nothing but a wall and assume the wall was always there. It wasn't always there. It's the edge of construction, the point where the renovation finally finished enough rooms to let you start moving in. So what do you do with that? The next time someone shows you a photo of yourself as a baby and asks if you remember, you can stop apologizing for not remembering. You were there. You were learning faster than at almost any other point in your life. You built the wiring that lets you fall in love, trust a stranger, flinch at a raised voice, or feel safe in someone's arms, all without a single memory to prove any of it happened. The lesson stuck. The footage didn't. That's not a malfunction. That's the most efficient learning machine you will ever own, doing exactly what it was built to do. Someone will hand you another photo someday, maybe of your own child this time, laughing in a room full of people who came just for them. They won't remember it either, but somewhere underneath the part of their brain that keeps score, they will already be becoming who they're going to be.